Madam Apollo. Welcome to the Thought Room.
Haley Rosebud, it's a pleasure, my lady. Thank you.
We're currently in your stunning home in the mountains in Boulder, Colorado. Well, technically the hills. Would you call this the hills?
The foothills.
The foothills in Boulder, Colorado. Mm-hmm. Gorgeous views. I am so excited to be here. I feel like this meeting, this third dimensional meeting on the physical plane for us has been a long time coming, or at least it feels that way to me. And sometimes I like to start off this podcast just sharing how I intersected with each guest.
Please
and
do.
For you, it's a pretty weird and radical story, I think. So you first came into my sphere in the middle of lockdown. So about a year ago, just over a year ago, this was the time when, if we can take it back, everybody imagine where you were during this time where everybody was just getting on Zoom calls all the time, just like looking for things manically to do with all of our time and adjusting to what that pocket of time really was. And I came across a global meditation invite that was going to be on Facebook, live streamed. A bunch of powerhouse spiritual leaders were going to be a part of it, and it was put on by a organization called Unify. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I live streamed this global meditation. It was so powerful, and the voices, the collective of voices from the spiritual leadership team, I'll call it, that was there, you really couldn't help but feel imbued with extra hope. Mm-hmm. And I remember staring at the little like Hollywood Squares screen of all the people on this massive Zoom call, and I saw your face. And more than your face, I saw your presence. Okay. And it was like, it sounds a little ridiculous to say, but it felt like your skin was shining. Like I looked at you and I was like just zoned in. And I was like, who is this person? They have such a powerful energy, not knowing at the time that you're one of the co-founders of Unify, you play a giant role, and that you also have all these incredible like paradigm splitting projects all across the globe. And you're one of the most fascinating people I've ever met. But in this moment, your energy spoke for you before I knew your resume. I now know your resume. I now know that you've been to the White House, you've been to the UN, you've been to Burning Man, you've spoken at all these places and spaces, and what you're cultivating is very, very powerful. I cannot wait for you to share it with people. And so thank you for coming into my sphere. The follow-up to that story is, and I'll just close that loop, is I reached out to you on Instagram. And it was very bold because we had no connections at the time. We didn't know each other. And this is how I remember the story, but maybe you can jump in as well.
Sure.
As I left you a voice note, right? In your DMs.
Yeah.
Just kind of went in cold and was like, hey, no. I was like, there's something about you. I can't explain it, but I feel that we need to know each other. And I just let go. I didn't know, if you would respond, but you did. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you were like, let's hop on a Zoom. And that was like the craziest. Well, actually, I don't think it was a Zoom. Was it a Zoom?
I think it was.
It was a Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's my usual.
Yeah, it's your usual. Yeah. And it was powerful. And several of the things, the golden nuggets you sprinkled in that initial conversation were a really big part of my integration of the actual, of plant medicine. And I started, you gave me access to your online, I call it Jedi training. I mean, how would you describe this?
Well, most of the
Guardian
students
Alliance.
call it Jedi training.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the Guardian Alliance.
Mm-hmm.
I only, couldn't call it Jedi training school because I had already had some guys in a LucasArts forum who worked for LucasArts asking, is this guy licensed to use the term Jedi? Because there were people reposting and marketing my Jedi training intensives back in 2006, 2007, something like that. And I had a few friends say, "Oh, dude, be careful! You're on the LucasArts radar."
Is
now
that why you
for
started
using the word
spelling
Jedi.
it differently?
I'd always used the DJ EDI
Jedi.
or DJ EDHI, which is the alternative, in my own considerations. As soon as I actually deepened my Egyptian studies and understood that that word plays a deep role in ancient Egypt.
Tell me more.
Yeah, so there's a couple stories about the Jedi in ancient Egypt. In one of the stories and translations, it is said that the Jedi was an architect of the pyramids who brought different metaphysical knowledges to play in creating the pyramids and other structures in ancient Egypt. In another translation or story, and again, these are from usually different sites and the hieroglyphic translations, there's always roughness to hieroglyphic translation because you're taking something that is an image that carries layers and layers of meaning and trying to ascribe it to a language like English in which each word has a very clear and simple definition. In the second translation, it is that the Jedi were a group of magi who were keepers and guardians of the temples. In either case, it points to the same thing, some level of a high-level group of teachers and guardians, those who carried special metaphysical knowledge and who were carrying the lineage of a knowledge that I believe was pre-Diluvian. In other words, prior to the end of the last ice age. They were carrying forth wisdom from the age of the time of what we often call Atlantis. And it is my belief and my assessment at this point, based on my own time in Egypt and my research there, as well as my work in Peru, my work in Bolivia, my work in Mexico, the work of others like Graham Hancock and many friends that I have in the space, Robert Schoch, who dated the Sphinx to 12,000 to 13,000 BC in terms of water erosion. There's so much data that suggests that the pyramids and a lot of the core structures within Egypt were absolutely built prior to the history that we even have in our history books. And of course, because they're such immense and powerful structures built with stone technology that's been lost to man since the end of the last ice age, they were reused and things have been added to them. Hieroglyphs have been put on things in places that certainly are, it's understandably confusing to the archaeologists that have looked at these spots.
Right. It's like buying a house with some add-ons, like remodeled and saying, "Oh, it was just built." Well, no, the remodeling was just done.
That's right. It's got new, wallpaper and, or drywall and new walls and new rooms and new things. But there are certain things about the sites in Egypt in particular that are so clear and revealed because the stone is right there in front of you. Places like the Serapeum where you have 50 to 100 ton sarcophagi, as they call them, basically boxes made out of single solid pieces of basalt, and not the weaker basalt, but the basalt that's in the 9.5 on the hardness scale, almost as hard as a diamond, that you have to use diamond saws to cut. And these single solid pieces of stone are
Right.
6 feet tall by 7 feet wide by 16 feet long and 1.5 feet thick with 2 feet thick lids.
Yeah.
And they're perfectly tuned to exact resonance hertz frequencies. If
Dude,
you make
I've
sounds.
heard this.
Yeah.
Like, I've heard this. This is very fascinating. I want to keep going on this,
Sure.
but
I love this topic.
I had someone on the show who teaches holographic sound healing training. His name's Paul Hubbard. I've actually done his sound training with the singing bowls and with resonance. And he told a story on the show about going to the King's Chamber in Egypt and the sensation of if you climb into the sarcophagus and you tone a tone. He said everybody, because of the shape of their body being different, has a slightly different tone that maybe you disagree, but getting into the sarcophagus, toning this tone, and then experiencing such vibrational resonance that it felt like the physical body was dissolving.
Yes.
Yeah.
The special thing about being in the sarcophagus, as they call it, I like to think of them more as resonance capacitors because that's more what they are. They're storage units for vibrational energy. They magnify and amplify using sonic energy to store memory, information, and electrical information as well. Is that when you're in one of these things and you tone inside of them, you have a physiological shape and size which will resonate at certain frequencies. In other words, certain frequencies, you'll feel your entire bone structure vibrating. That's what he was getting at.
Right.
You'll literally feel your body being hit as if it was like a tuning fork where your whole body will resonate. And then there's an extended frequency, which is actually the box's resonant frequency, the sarcophagi, the resonance capacitor's resonant frequency. And when you're in the King's Chamber, there are 2 specific frequencies that I was able to measure and identify that match the resonance chamber, the sarcophagi's frequency, and the room's frequency, so that the entire place hums and will continue humming and resonating even when you stop making sound. It'll keep going, so you can take a whole breath and then start again.
Right.
And the sound doesn't stop.
Almost like a singing bowl. When you first stop playing
right.
it keeps resonating.
Because the stone, the granite itself, the structure itself is crystalline and resonates like a crystal singing bowl.
Right.
The lower frequency is 91.5 hertz, which is F sharp, and it's nearly exact on 91.5. Now, of course, the King's Chamber has been damaged. There's a little bit of wall damage. The sarcophagus has a portion that's been damaged on it. It's likely that it would nail exactly a frequency, possibly more precise than that if it deviates off of the 91.5. But what's really fascinating is that there's also an overtone frequency, and it's A sharp. It's a little higher. And that overtone frequency, I measured using a sonic measurement app device to get the exact frequency as close as I could, as 117.65 hertz. Now, 765 and 567 are one of my favorite number sequences. And we can talk about that later and the importance of the geometries of those shapes and forms. But what's particularly astounding is that the gap between those, the ratio between 91.5 hertz and 117.65 is 0.7777.
Wow.
The gap is literally 7777. That's the ratio between the two. And that's not a mistake. And it's also important to mention that I measured the exact same 91.5 hertz base frequency in the sarcophagi of a chamber underneath the pyramids at Hawaii, a chamber in Saqqara, in the Serapeum chambers, clearly there is a shared wisdom and architecture to this vibration that was laid into these sites as part of a knowledge codex that connects all of them together. These weren't entirely different groups and entirely different dynasties. And even if they were, the architects of these spaces and these stone structures, which we don't even know how they built today,
Right.
were connected.
So exciting. I'm so lit up over this stuff. I don't think I told you, but I'm planning a trip to Egypt later this year for the first time. So
Nice.
this is very much tickling all my curiosities around these things.
Great.
You told me a story once about, I think it was 2012.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't you go to Egypt or take a group?
Yeah.
Are you willing to tell that story? Because when the first time you told that, I was like, that is so cool.
Sure. Yeah. So the fall of 2012 was a wild ride for me. I had just gotten married in May, and then a friend of mine who I'd deeply connected with at this Jedi council that another friend of mine organized, and he wanted to bring together the deepest leaders in metaphysics and business and media and future thought to sit at this square table that should have been round in a castle-like temple in Ojai, California. And I met this brother named Adil Kassam. And Adil had these visions of doing this next level kind of live aid experience, this deep, powerful, let's get everybody on the planet connected and at these big concerts and events, and let's leverage that energy and drive capital to make change and get them all synced up. And I, at the time, was doing these experiments that I like to call global telepathic conjunctions, where I had identified a lot of these magical people, as I thought of them, ambassadors, people that had wisdom about some of the deeper physics and metaphysics of reality and the capacity of consciousness to influence that. And I was getting them synced up at different times to do specific conscious operations to try to make change and to succeed in doing so in many cases. Experienced quite a few miracles from that. And Adil and I came together, and the sort of gestation of the vision was like, maybe there's some level of this telepathic synchronization that we do at these events and do that all together. At the time, I was pretty busy because when we'd met at this initial gathering, because I was literally launching Guardian Alliance, and I had just gotten the download of Guardian Alliance, and Alex Fairman, who's another co-teacher of mine in the Guardian Alliance, and I were sitting next to each other, literally leading this Jedi council. And he and I went on to work together and to create the courses that would forge a sort of metaphysical journey through these different elements of the self. And so it was a while before Adil and I reconnected. And when we did, he showed up in San Anselmo, California, which is where I was living. He met up with me one evening and he was like, dude, I got the domain. And I was like, what did you get, bro? And he's like, unify.org. And I was like, yes, that is awesome. And we spent this evening going into these super high ecstatic states, thinking about, here comes December 21st, 2012. This is this huge gate on the planet. What can we do to support there being a unstoppable seed of awakening and transformation for the people on the planet? Can we pop the noosphere, as Teilhard de Chardin would call it, and awaken this global telepathic field more deeply? And so we went down the road of like, how do we do this? How do we pull this off? How do we mix the elements of like what I'd been doing with these connections at a deeper metaphysics level with his visions of events? And he brought in this friend, Patrick Cronfley, and who lives in Austin by you, by the way. And Patrick had been doing this amazing work connecting people in city hall buildings, called meditation mobs. So what happens if you gather a bunch of people, meditate together in a space, and what's the impact that could have? And he was also very proficient at connecting with lots of different organizations and getting sponsors. So he was the perfect powerhouse to come in and partner. And Adil and him already had a great connection. And those two just went off to the races, getting organizations, getting partners, finding places where we could do these events. And I buckled down to focus on the technical systems necessary for us to actually capture who the people are, where they are, how do we display them, how do we deal with this in social media. And so I created the Facebook page and we used these systems called Nation Builder at first, to help capture all of these people's interest. We brought in a few other tech friends to help build a map system so we could map everybody on the planet, which to this day is still one of the really key parts of Unify. And then we went into the process of deciding, where are we going to go and who. So I mentioned that I got married in May, and this swept into my life, and I was like, this is the most important thing for me. I'm going to freaking help make a change on the planet. It's easy to kind of get swept up in the magic and intensity of doing something that's so big that it can change the world, and let it run away with you a little bit. And I was really not present in my marriage that was brand new as I was going into this work, and that caused a lot of challenge and dynamic for me. And at the same time, I was unwilling to let go of this because it was like the power of the masculine purpose and direction. Like I had to hold it no matter what. I'm going to see this through. And so I was dealing with all of that in the dynamics, and I decided that I wanted to do this journey and this experience of Unify, that Egypt was the place where I wanted to plant a flag. And it was perfect because I had this friend of mine, Isis, reach out, and her name actually by birth is Isis Andrea, and her brother's name is Osiris Andrea. And they were good friends of mine from the Northeast. And Isis said, hey, I'm working with these guys from the Do Lab, and they're creating this convergence event in Egypt. And we want you to be a part of it. In fact, could you help us build the website and the tech for it and all the stuff? So I take on this client, I'm building this site for them, I'm helping them create this event. And in turn, I'm partnering the event with Unify so that it's basically a Unify event. And we have other groups, planning Stonehenge. We have other groups planning Chichen Itza, guys in Jerusalem that are doing work on all different sides of the religious groups there, building relationships to do this kind of unified spiritual event. And and we went off to the races and ended up in Egypt. And I had a whole series of experiences there. It was my first time in Egypt, and there's so much to share. It's hard to even know where to start. But was there a particular part that you remember you'd want to hear about?
Yeah, I remember you telling me on the day that was, prophesized to be the ending of the world, which was that December 21st, 2012, which, I'll get you to speak to why that wasn't the end of the world in a moment.
Yeah, sure.
Or maybe it was the ending of some worlds and not others. But this story about getting special permission, I think, to be in where you were, and also that there was some equipment already set up to be measuring frequency, and that they were looking for new chambers or something. Am I on the right track with this story?
There's two different stories you're speaking to, actually.
Okay.
So when I was there for December 21st, 2012, we had a whole sequence of activations around the 21st. And that was an overnight session in the King's Chamber, dawn between the paws of the Sphinx, with oracles, gathering wisdom from the Akashic records, as they call it, which also, of course, have other names and other traditions. And then in the morning of December 21st, we were literally celebrating at dawn on the rooftop of the hotel across from the pyramids, and then went to the space between the pyramids for the synchronization moment. And the synchronization moment was very fascinating because we had a huge group of people in the hundreds, but there were guards all around, like watching our group and others. They knew this date was important. And so we had to drop into meditation, but not look like we were meditating. If we stood still, if you looked like you were doing a meditation, they literally would be pointing Uzis at you.
Really?
And guns and like yelling and screaming at you to stop. And so we as pods had to kind of strategically move around the Giza Plateau. And I ended up finding a Russian group who were super into Saint Germain, who had actually crafted this beautiful ribbon circle and were holding hands and toning on this inside of this temple space that's all ruins, of course, but on the Giza Plateau. And joining them and with a few others, totally dropping in with them, and then having, guides and the guards coming running, and then the guides are like kicking their ribbon and destroying their little altar and then they would just smile and bow and move and then hold hands again and start toning again until the guards would be pointing guns at them, and then they'd move and then they'd go. And it was such a clear representation of the battle between the fear of the loss of control and the loss of knowing what is going on, and the people so committed to seeing through the healing and seeing through the change that no matter what, they're just going to circle up again. And when that was a real wake-up call in terms of the intensity of Egypt. It also around the belief systems that are in place that are part of what has forged the current archaeological perspective, and why there's such intensity within the Ministry of Antiquities there to keep the story the way it is. It's religious-based. It's fear of their entire stories being wrong in terms of their religion. It's fear of being massively wrong and shamed in the fact that they've told these things are the truth to the entire world, and everybody's books around the planet and every university on the planet say these things, right? Mm-hmm. You can imagine the level of intensity around shame, of concern, of being wrong that these people have, and yet it's propagating a story that we now archaeologically, geologically, through anthropological studies, we know it's wrong. We know it's wrong. Right. The timing is incorrect. But there's such a strong grip to hold on to the old world, and we see that all over in the world right now in society. This grip on an old way of thinking that has to let go.
Thank you for saying this. Yeah. And I want to underscore this because when you are speaking about this and you're speaking about Egypt and the people there and the culture, and I'm envisioning myself growing up local to that area and what we would be indoctrinated with religiously, culturally, growing up there. Yeah. And the idea of what people will do to protect a lie that is the foundation of an entire paradigm. Yeah. Or capitalism or whatever. And the hilarity of it is when it first crossed the threshold of my mind, I was like, oh, wow, that really sucks to have the wool pulled over your eyes. And then I was like, wait a minute. Wouldn't that be so convenient for us over here in North America to be going, oh, poor them, having the wool pulled over their eyes. Yeah. All of those systems, that they're being lied to about. Yeah. And I think one of the most ignorant things we do often psychologically as human beings is, we think things can never happen to us, right? That'll never happen to me. And we live life in these trance states, right? Where we're so asleep. And that's why things like the current events of the last year have been so torturously awakening.
Yeah.
There's been pockets of shame, of grief, of confusion being released, all of this because things are coming to light, and you are one of those people who are boldly, bravely, courageously bringing things to light. And I so appreciate that. So
thank you. Thank you. I'd like to speak to a couple of the things that you're pointing to. There's a reason why I said we already are, in terms of the wool being pulled over our eyes over here. We're not immune from it at all, are we? I mean, let's look at a couple things. One is, how many people go to school and grow up and authentically recognize that this country was taken from Native American people who were effectively slaughtered, and raped, and their villages pillaged, and them being forced into concentration camps, which we call reservations, the space they get to keep, which were often not their original land property, which were the places that had the least amount of natural resources, water, buffalo, etc. And there's this underlying shame in that as a country, we still have not addressed. We're still not looking at that. We pull the wool over it. Okay, yeah, let's give them the Native American Museum in Washington, D.C. Okay, that's not solving the problem. If you talk to indigenous people who grow up in these reservations, which are effectively ghettos in a lot of cases, they don't have access to the good organic food stores. They just have the baseline crap, really. There's one. Then you've got Christianity, which there's so much Christianity in this country. And, I love the teachings of Christ. But if you look at the history of Christianity, how much of the history of what Christianity has actually done is acknowledged and recognized if you go to a Christian church? I mean, I grew up going to Christian churches at times. I had friends that grew up in that space. I used it as a place to connect with people and found a lot of beauty in it. And then I also found a lot of stuff that I was like, wait a second, what? Like, huh? And as I got older, of course, I began to discover and realize that there were other ways of thinking about the world, such as the ability to realize that there is life force in everything, that nature is a communicable force, that there are elementals to reality. And then I discover this entire tradition that, at first I found Wicca, and then I found Druid traditions, which started linking into my own Irish ancestry, for example, and realized, oh my gosh, people who believed that nature was a way, connecting with nature was a way of connecting with God. And in other words, nature being a temple, were literally slaughtered for that, burned at the stake, and the level of Holocaust caused across Europe against women who literally just knew how herbs could be used to heal people, or that there was this deeper sort of relationship of consciousness and matter. Where is that taught? How come that's left out of the story of Christianity? This is stuff that has to be accounted for. And it's very deep and personal to me because I'm half Irish. And I wondered for a long time about my Irish ancestry, especially as I connected with a lot of indigenous elders and youth and did these prayer runs for world peace, in 2005 and 2006, and was hanging out with a lot of Lakota kids. And, I'm the white kid in the crew, and I'm the one that doesn't have a tradition. It's all their traditions, right? That need to be honored and are important. But what about me? What about the Irish tradition? You look up what's Irish traditions, what do people think of Irish? And what you get is St. Patrick's Day, 4-leaf clovers, leprechauns,
Green beer,
Guinness, basically, right? And that most of those, probably excepting the leprechaun and the beer, the other parts are not Irish at all. In fact, it was, in some sense, the story of St. Patrick is that he came in to chase the snakes out of Ireland. Well, what were the snakes? The snakes were actually the people that kept the wisdom of the serpent and the dragon, which are the descendants of the Tuatha De Danann, which is the lineage of the actual Irish people, right? And the Druid culture and the magic and the wisdom of that culture, which was completely wiped out by Christianity, right? Unfortunately. And there's so much wisdom and magic contained within that tradition, and so many gifts of understanding and things that can decode mysteries in our current life. For example, people hear of tarot cards, right? And they have no idea what the tarot is or where the tarot comes from. And yet the 4 sacred symbols of the tarot are the 4 treasures of the Tuatha De Danann lineage. So there's deep Irish roots with that, where the tarot gets often associated with gypsies and then Eastern Europe, and there's other connections, but it points to a deeper lineage. It points to an older connection. And we find this the more we dig into stories behind the 13 tribes of Israel, the more we look at the connections between the pyramids of Egypt and the landscape behind what the Incas built on down in Peru and Bolivia, and the ancient parts of Mexico and all of these sites around the world, we realize that there's a deeper wisdom, architecture of archetypes, and connection between peoples on this planet that goes before the history that we know about. And reclaiming that is about reclaiming our connectivity with each other, who we really are, why the differences that we believe we have between religions are pointless, because we're just one people. We're one world, we're one connection, we're one human race and species. And it even gets more interesting when you start to look at the fact that our diversity as a human species may in fact be because of extraterrestrial involvement.
Ooh, let's go there.
Ooh, okay, let's go there.
Because you know what? I was reading an article just this morning in, I think it was the New York Times, and it was like, the title is like, why is everyone talking about UFOs? Question mark. Because there's, of course, all these government disclosure talkings, happenings. Can you maybe set some context? And because
Sure.
I know you've had your fingers on the pulse of all of this stuff for quite some time, where some people listening to this are just like, wait, what? The government's talking about UFOs now? Like, this is a thing that's happening. So like, let's catch people up to speed and then take it wherever you want to.
Yeah, sure. A brief catch up would be to say that there have been people for a long time testifying that we're not alone, that there have been extraterrestrial visits and spacecraft on this planet that have been captured, and or there have been reproduction vehicles developed from their technologies. All of that stuff has been pressed far to the fringe for a long time, and very intentionally done so by what most of the whistleblowers in that space called disinformation campaigns. When I met Dr. Stephen Greer in 2001, he had done this press conference in Washington, D.C., and at the time he had about 400 witnesses from CIA, NSA, FBI, pilots, astronauts, the head counsel of the Iran-Contra hearings. I mean, these are not obscure people. These are the ratified, expected, leaders who the people have trusted as government agents in these different positions, who are all exposing this. And this project that he called the Disclosure Project, which still to this day, the Disclosure Project book is a fantastic collection of these testimonies, as well as the actual paperwork that some of these individuals at risk of their own life brought forward in order to bring this information to the public. Stephen used to say that 80 to 90% of all information about UFOs and extraterrestrial phenomena is disinformation. And I think that that has absolutely been the case. And that, in fact, as we've approached current era, maybe the disinformation campaigns have shifted gears and moved into other departments,
Right.
but they still exist. And there's a reason why they exist.
Let's talk about the psychology of that. Like,
Yeah.
why would somebody want to put out disinformation?
Yeah, so let's just take one of the stories as an example. Let's say there's a spacecraft from another planet with super advanced technology that crash lands in New Mexico desert, right? And technology is recovered from that. And you have, in around the same time period, within a decade or so, you have an individual named Orson Welles that does this radio show that expresses, hey, oh my gosh, he did the radio show, The War of the Worlds, as if it was a real-time event happening. And people all over the place heard the radio show, thought there was actually an extraterrestrial invasion, and panicked. And there was panic in all of these different areas of people listening to this radio show. Now, the government sees this, of course. Now, you've got two major concerns: national security and panic of the public. Why would you keep it secret if you now recovered an alien spacecraft, so to speak, or technology? Well, one, you don't want the Russians to get it, or the Chinese or any of these enemies of the state, right? So you want that to be as hidden and carefully covered up as possible. On the other side, you don't want the public panicking. So you don't want anybody in the public to know this is happening because you don't want to stir up a whole series of panics. That's how it starts. As you go along, you start to develop technologies from that. Those have to be protected. You start to understand more about the other species that are coming to this planet and realize they're entering airspace all the time, and you don't want to look weak. So you don't want to broadcast that out because, hey, we can't control these ships. They're flying in and out of our airspace. That sounds like you don't have the situation under control.
Right.
You got to think of the general who has to have this under control. National security under control, the new technology under control, meeting the force of the Cold War under control, right?
Right.
But you start to see that they have less and less control and they're more and more scared. And there's this whole battle going on to understand these deeper technologies. And one of the windows into doing that is by understanding consciousness. And so there becomes this whole movement to study metaphysics and consciousness, really spurned initially probably by the Nazis, to be honest. But following that, you have the Russians doing studies on remote viewing and figuring out how to put a pilot to sleep who's flying a enemy aircraft. And then you end up with the US developing similar technologies and doing similar studies. For your listeners, there's a great documentary put out by Caroline Corey and a few others called Superhuman. It's on Amazon Prime, I believe, and it's a pretty good light level review of some of these abilities, remote viewing and et cetera, that the government did deep dives and studies into. And it's been in my awareness for a long time because as I started to discover that we have these innate abilities and skills, I started to wonder, why don't people know about this? And I had to do my own digging to figure it out. So I'll wrap up the disclosure story a bit by saying that we understand why they wanted to keep it secret. And then it became more and more clear over the last decade that one, it wasn't going to stay secret. Two, there's a lot of pressure to disclose this information to the public. And three, the amounts of sightings and the amounts of events and the amount of ships visiting, et cetera, is increasing and increasing. So how do you control the narrative? Well, eventually you have to go public and you have to figure out how to do that in a way that's going to keep the same level of security going on. So this reached its height basically last year and into this year. But last year, I would say, is probably the biggest disclosure breakthrough that's ever happened, in which the New York Times published an article that is re-exposed and resurfaced shots of spacecraft by Navy pilots and got Pentagon statements on it. And the Pentagon literally says, we have recovered off-world vehicles. This was the first time that it was not just unidentified aircraft or unidentified or UFO, UAP, whatever.
They said this.
They said these are off-world vehicles. And
wow.
That, I want you guys just to think about that for a moment. The Pentagon of the United States publicly expressed that there are off-world vehicles that they have been studying. That's not Russian, that's not Chinese, that's off-world vehicles. So that disclosure has officially happened. We now know these are extraterrestrial craft. And now the question mark has, of course, been coming into this year, is that going to be used in some way for the creation of space-based weapons or additional defense systems? Like, is this a leverage point?
Right. Is it a rationale for why we need to start creating massively destructive weapons?
Well, that was the concern of Wernher von Braun, one of the main rocket scientists who built the rocket age in our country. And on his deathbed, to a woman that he was testifying to, who is part of the Disclosure Project, and all of her testimonies are there, she expressed, Carol Rosen, I believe is her name, that Wernher von Braun said that there are 4 steps to massive unified government planetary control. And they would play them like a series of cards, the 4 aces in their back pocket. And the 3rd card was the card of terrorism. Now, we've all seen the impact of that card. We've seen the government leverage terrorism to do horrible things on this planet, and maybe good things, but my God, a lot of war.
Right.
And the 4th card, as Wernher von Braun said it, would be the extraterrestrial threat.
Huh.
And she brought this out.
What a way to unify people, right?
Yeah, exactly. A way to unify people, but also a way to potentially have the excuse to build space-based weapon systems that could laser target any individual anywhere on the planet and just gone. They're gone at the will of the government any moment.
Right.
Now, there's problems to that whole thing. This gets into some deep territory because it could sound like a lot scary. This is some scary stuff.
Yeah.
But you got to recognize and acknowledge that most of the contact experiences being shared by individuals all over the world, and I've been getting in touch with them and talking with them for years and years and having my own experiences in this space, don't suggest there is any threat or harm from these beings that are visiting our planet.
Huh.
In fact, they suggest exactly the opposite, that these beings are trying to help make sure we don't destroy ourselves and get through this threshold of growth.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying in a blanket theory that there's no bad extraterrestrials. I mean, God, that's like saying, there's no bad Chinese people, but there's not like like Chinese people are not bad.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. No single race. That's
right.
a blanket statement.
No race, no species. You cannot say any species or race or whatever is good or bad. That is the definition of racism.
Right.
And speciesism is the next step.
Right.
Right. And we already hear this and get the programs spread around of like, oh, the reptilians are all evil and they're here to kill us and they're coming to destroy us. And look, if there was a fleet of reptilian vehicles that wanted to take out this planet or take over this earth, it would have already happened. There's not, the situation is different than that, okay? There's more complexity to the situation. And the complexity is that, yes, there's always good and bad actors of any species, but for the most part, and in general, we're not witnessing a massive galactic war, and Earth is not this middle place in a battleground for life and souls. Earth is this incredible library of consciousness and life that is revered across this galaxy and is trying to be protected. There's a reason why they're coming in and shutting down nuclear weapons tests. There's a reason why all the nuclear testing and bomb stuff stopped at one point, because there was interference coming in saying, that's not a good idea, you guys. You're messing with the laws of space-time here and your life and the planet. This is not just isolated to Earth that you're affecting. And there's a lot of information out there that backs what I'm saying. And what I'd like the listeners to kind of take away from this is that you got to do your own seeking, because there, again, is always going to be a lot of agenda and information trying to sway you one side or the other to one thing or another. And I can tell you that once you sit in a more transcendent space and you look at the whole puzzle, you look at the many dynamics of the chessboard, the situation looks very different than what we're led to believe.
Thank you for saying all of this. And I love this idea of discernment being brought in, because again, it is such a confusing time.
Yeah.
And I think what I want to bring in is the invitation to ask questions.
Yes.
Because for me, I'm happy to debate any issue. I'm happy to talk about anything with respect, with reverence, with an openness and a willingness to be wrong.
Right.
But the moment somebody tells me I'm not allowed to ask a question about that because it makes me a bad person.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We're creating something different in our culture now. This idea of cancel culture, or it's social policing, really, honestly, with a lot of these things. It's like, if I was someone who wanted to control the narrative, whatever that narrative was, and I knew enough about human psychology, and you don't have to know a lot.
No.
You just have to know a little bit.
That's right.
It's like, honestly, the scene that's coming to mind is from the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, where it's kind of a joke, but they want the father of the household to make a certain decision, and the aunt and the mother are kind of scheming, and they're like, well, we need to get him to think this is his idea, right? And the line is, the man may be the head of the household, but the woman is the neck. And she can get the man to turn his head any way she wants. So if I really wanted to control something, I would make the people I was controlling think it was their idea. That's the way that I would do it. And I would create things to make them question themselves, question their own intuition, their own feeling, and to gaslight each other.
Right.
So,
and themselves.
Into despair. Into a very narrow view of life, completely riddled with fear. So if anyone listening to this has little lights going off in their head, or is thinking about somebody in their lives who maybe needs to hear this message, encouraging you to share that. And it's okay to be afraid. I want to say that too. Like, things have gotten really weird in 2020 and 2021.
And so confusing.
And time and our experience of time, and we can go into this if you want, is changing. And there's the number of events that we're experiencing in the same arbitrary measurement that we came up with as a second, events, notifications, just things popping into our awareness, things that we have access to. Think about the evolution of the human brain to try and keep up with what's even happened in the last 100 years. It's absurd. So just everyone give themselves a little pat on the back, a little grace, a little space, and empower yourself. If something doesn't feel right in your body, ask questions.
That's right. Ask questions and keep asking questions. I did an article last year sometime, I think it was, on what I called the map of a disinformation campaign, to kind of lay out
You're the best.
functionality of this kind of stuff. And I chose a particular topic, a particular disinformation campaign that would not be politically volatile. etc. And this particular approach was about geometry, right? And it was a group that some of your listeners may have heard of. And what their teaching is that there's this sort of one particular spiral that's known as the spiral of eternal life, and that the phi spiral, phi ratio, the flower of life, they call the flower of death, that this phi ratio is like literally like this evil demonic thing, that the flower of life pattern, which is found on Egyptian temples and is literally the geometry you can use to craft all the Platonic solids, and it's the way molecular structures assemble, that this is death, this is evil, that these systems are meant for death, and that if you just somehow align yourself with this one special spiral that they came up with, this like Christic light spiral that's like the Christ energy, then you'll have eternal life and there will be no more death and everything's going to be hunky-dory forever. And if you believe that the flower of life is special, then you're evil. Mm-hmm. Like that if you believe that any of these other things are good or okay, or that you like them or that you use them, then you are in fact evil. You're a demon and you're following other demons.
Right.
And that right there, that assignment of you believe what we believe, or you're on the dark side.
Right.
You're part of the evil group. You're part of the cabal. You're part of the controlling group that's trying to distort and distract people and etc. Mm-hmm. That right there, that is the ultimate illustration of a line in a disinformation campaign. Mm-hmm. And it's a psychological tactic.
Yeah.
It says, you're either going to come along with us and believe what we believe, or you're the bad guy, and we're going to turn everyone against you, and all your friends are going to hate you. And I mean, it's
primal.
It's high school peer pressure.
And it's primal because it's like
it's
that.
Horrible.
It's tribalism. It's like you follow the tribe or you're exiled. That's and exile means death.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah. And it's so funny. This example is so important because it literally points to fear of death. What they're not willing to face is the reality that things die.
Yeah.
It's their own fear of death that's led them down this path of like, we have to find the one geometry that is eternal because everything else is dying. And if it's dying, it must be part of the evil and the dark because death is so scary and I can't face it.
Right.
That's all it is. Life and death happens all the time. It's beautiful. It's not evil. I'm sorry. Yeah. Like, that's saying that the entire universe is evil. That's saying that every single being and every ancestor you've ever had that's born and died are part of some evil pattern that shouldn't be. Well, talk about denial of your own existence. And so I surfaced that because I had some very serious questions about certain political statements that were being made and certain things I heard being propagated within that space. And while I still choose not to go into detail about that in any public conversation in general, I think that the way I've just described this disinformation campaign can point people to where that issue might be.
Yeah.
Because when you ask certain questions about how can this be true and this also be true, and how is it possible that this is happening as you say it is and as these people say it is, and yet at the same time I'm looking at this specific data and that is provable, backable, etc. These things have been signed, this is in law, these things are occurring. How can these two things be reconciled? And in response, as me asking that question, what I have people saying back to me in comments on a YouTube video that I did is, oh my God, he's revealing that he's part of the dark side and he must be part of the cabal.
Wow.
Because I'm questioning something.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, you're having me think of a local Austinite, JP Sears, and he does a lot of comedy, and his comedy it's shifted in the last year, but he does a little segment on fact checking, which I found really hilarious. And he does this little thing about, who owns the fact checkers and kind of, I just recommend people kind of just YouTube it and watch it. But it's this idea of like the people who are fact checking them are actually the fact checkers that, it's something to look into. But I want to thank you for speaking about all these things in the highly intelligent and articulate, thoughtful way that you have. And I think the takeaway for anyone listening is to just dive deeper, dive deeper, be open, be open. I think the problems occur on the micro and macro level when we refuse to see one another. Every war that's ever been started, every breakdown in a singular marriage, in the smallest relationship, communication issues come from an unwillingness to see one another, to be with the feelings, not just the viewpoints, the feelings that are being expressed by the other. So the more that we can get in touch with that, I had an insight during one of my Ayahuasca ceremonies. And the statement was, there's no such thing as hatred. There's only a resistance to love. And that love is pervasive. It's what exists. And that when we're feeling friction or tension for another, with a group of people, that is a resistance within us that wants to keep a certain part of us private, secret, hidden in our subconscious to create an identity that is away from things that we're not ready to look at yet, pieces of ourselves we might not be ready to heal, and understanding lovingly what the identity is. And when you were talking about these forces of power kind of marionetting us, hurting us into certain directions, either you belong to us or you're in or you're out. It's that. And in my life, I have committed to not make decisions based out of what I don't want. I'm going to choose this because I don't want that. I'm afraid. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for saying that. I think it's really powerful to choose to be motivated by what you do want in the world. And I see a future where we have these incredibly healthy green cities because we don't need cars as much. I see concrete broken up and turned into community gardening in neighborhoods where food, the sort of source of power, is owned and controlled by the community itself and restored in its might instead of just money, because we've now replaced food with money as the construct of power. I see starports all over the planet and open sharing and technology and communication with species that have long figured out how to manage their planets and steward the life on their planets, ensuring the biospheres are healthy and that they're building in tune and in harmony with their worlds. I see Earth being held by guardians, those who care about all life, every species, every genetic line, and recognize that they're all important and they all play a part in our journey through the universe and the great puzzle of existence that we're solving and unfolding within ourselves. I see people that currently are stuck and trapped and at the bottom, that work at the McDonald's and that have the worst kinds of jobs and situations imaginable, being offered opportunities to go and retreat in paradise in the Pleiades and restructure their entire thinking about how to live and how to create in their life, where they're no longer trapped to this idea of the American dream or this connection that you have to go to a job and work 40, 60 hours a week and slave over minimum wage just to pay the rent of your house, just to have the food on your table, just to take care of your kids, and that's the only choice you have? No. I believe that we can begin cracking those puzzles now, and I believe that a lot of that comes through creating more powerful communication mechanisms for us to learn from each other around the planet without distortion, without throttling within our social media space, without the fact checkers of Snopes and whoever else coming in with highly opinionated, highly politicized angles on the information that we're sharing. That trust can actually become the currency that forms the graph of our connectivity, that we may know and see how the lens of our trust has shaped the world around us and be able to make choices, new choices based on that. And where the power of economics and the ability to create and craft value is democratized, given back to the people, decentralized, such that every person recognizes that no matter who you are, you have a gift that is valuable for others. Whether that's just simply sharing a little tip that your grandmother gave you at one point about how to clean the floors or do the thing, that you can actually share that and that you can create value from that, and that the value from that going viral doesn't just become the massive monetary marketing engine of these centralized companies and corporations, but actually uplifts you, whoever you are, to being that beacon of grandma's wisdom, and support your family with that. And so to this end and to this vision, I've been working on and envisioning for over 15 years a decentralized 3D social operating system that would give some of these key tools to people to be able to take their data back, take their identity back, their sovereignty back. But I've seen a lot of replacement social networks come and go and rise and fall, and I think that there's a very clear reality to the fact that just like when the electric car came out, it's great that you can drive an electric car, but if the electric car looks and feels like crap and the user experience is poor, and you don't have charging stations and you don't have a clear way to manage or deal with this on a daily basis that's as convenient, as easy, and even perhaps more useful than the current car you're driving, you're not going to get an electric car. And we can take a lot of lessons from, companies like Tesla and people like Musk who said, well, what if I make an electric car that's faster and sexier than all the other sports cars out there? Then will you think electric cars are cool? And it worked, right? And now we have all of these companies, as Tesla's released economy electric cars and others, and they're all sexy and they all have great interfaces and the user experience is next level and it's just fun to drive. They're just a great experience. Now you've got every car company on the race to getting out the next sexy, cool, fast, awesome electric car. So I believe that we're going to provide that bridge. We're going to say, hey, you know what? It's not just an obscure, cool thing that geeks are into to have and own and control your identity or to have decentralization. It can actually be really sexy to do that. It can be powerful to be part of this rising tide of people owning and controlling their own information, creating their own countries and continents of groups and networks that are their private groups that they can weave with in a secure and private way. And we can also empower people all the way down to the bottom level to create and monetize information. And there's real magic in the learning market out there. People think that the big data market and the advertising market are huge in social media, right? Sure. Big data, yeah, it's a $50 billion market for people selling your data. That's a lot, right? And yeah, marketing is a big market. You know how they throttle you so you can't reach your followers so that you pay them to boost your post? Yeah, they make $100 billion on that a year. That's a lot. And yet both of those entire finance markets are tiny compared to the learning management system market. In fact, just people teaching each other online is a $200 billion market. Look at that. I mean, come on. Do we have to steal people's data? Do we have to throttle them and only do marketing? No, there's a solution. And that solution is people being able to give their gift to each other. Mm. What a good way to get forward into the future, right?
Amazing. This changes everything. You know, this type of thinking splits the paradigm, shatters it. It's us truly, consciously taking control and being the creators of the future we want to see.
That's right.
Thank you for sharing that vision in such detail of what you see, of what you're creating. If there's any additional details or pieces about, I know it's, middle stages. I don't know what you would say as far as core network and where you are, but if you want to speak to that anymore in the trajectory, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, it's early stage. I'm very, very excited that we're getting the support we need and building the alliances that we need to bring this to scale. And I envision that the system that we're creating and the way that we're building it is really designed to uplift all of the decentralized projects. We're not here to come into the space and say, oh yeah, all of you guys have been doing it wrong. Watch us. We're so cool and we can do it right. It's much more like creating the user experience that lets the masses get interested, because we got to bring people over. It's just like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and things like that. You know, there's immense power shifts that happen through crypto. And yet, for the most part, for the general public, it still feels inaccessible. It's still difficult. People think, oh, if I'm going to get in on Bitcoin, I have to have a whole Bitcoin or whatever. And I'm not saying this because I'm a huge proponent of Bitcoin, because to be honest, Bitcoin has major problems, right? But it's holding a flag. It's like a stake in the ground towards a different kind of financial system. And that's really powerful, as well as the idea that wealth has become decentralized in a new way because of things like Bitcoin. People that never would have had that kind of money or been able to create their great project because, whatever, they didn't come from a wealthy family. They never learned all the tricks of the trusts. They never had all of that. Well, they just happened to be super geeks and into Bitcoin mining in the early days. And now they're funding incredible projects and building new kinds of farming systems and, developing cannabis companies and crafting there's entire cities being built in Africa, built off of crypto systems, and they're future cities designed to up-level the entire economic structure and development and learning and education mechanisms of an entire country. Uganda is one of the places where this is seeded and is happening. So the world that we see coming comes through our ability to, as Buckminster Fuller liked to say, transcend and include the existing system. When you build a new system that makes the old one obsolete, people just migrate. And so this is true also of a lot of our major problems and centralized monopolies within the tech space, is that for us to take back the world of our communication system and our data and how all of our stuff is stored, we have to build a new system that transcends that old one and yet still lets you pull from and interact with the old system so that you can transition, right? You can be 1 foot in each world until you just don't need the other world anymore. And now you're just fully operating within the new system. And it can be smooth and gentle and exciting and fun and adventurous, and not feel like, Armageddon is coming around the corner and all the systems have to collapse and everything has to be torn down. There's better ways of doing things. And I think we're on track to creating that kind of bridge, and that training, it's training wheels to get us to the next bridge, which I look at as humans becoming an interstellar species.
Casual segue there. That's, first of all, thank you.
Yeah.
Once again, that's incredible. And before we transition out of that, I'm sure a great number of people will be interested in everything that you just said.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very excited for you. I know you've been in a capital raise. I know you've raised a great deal of money for this. If there's anybody listening who wants to get in touch with you for any reason or wants to check out more information on this, where can they go?
Yeah. Right now they can be teased really effectively by going to core.network and get on our mailing list there, whatever. We're not sending out any emails right now, but we will be as we move into alpha phase and then into the beta launch next year. And but I think just visiting that site will give them a little bit of an idea of the scope and the depth of the project. Again, it's been something that I've been working on for 15 years. My co-chairman of my company, Harlan Wood, he's been even deeper in this space, living in San Francisco for a long time, as I used to live there as well. And he was there for a long time before moving to Hawaii, actually. And we've been in the trenches with everybody working on these problems, whether that's, the internet identity workshops and looking at identity systems, and the amazing work of Kylia Hamlin and some of her community groups working on decentralized web and decentralized web summits. Harlan being featured in Wired magazine online for building Raspberry Pis to create subnetworks in the Mission in San Francisco. This is something that we've been on the track around for a long time. And to be honest, to do what we're doing now, which is basically like Iron Man style Minority Report type interfaces that we've seen in science fiction movies for a long time, making those real and making that efficient and effective for users to play with and to experience their data through is something that's only just become possible through technological maturity over the last few years. Animation systems in the browser evolving, and then, of course, the underlying technical architecture, which has had to go through many, many layers of evolution to get close to what we're talking about. And now the closest group to the build of that sort of architecture that have been friends of ours for as long as we've been envisioning this stuff are at Holochain, and Arthur Brock and Eric Harris-Braun and that team are very close friends of ours, and we've been cheering on the development of Holochain and its systems because they've figured out a lot of parts of this stack. And for those of you that are into cryptocurrency and blockchain, Holochain is literally the next generation of blockchain, where instead of requiring global validation, meaning like in the current model, if I gave you $10, then we'd have to also technically broadcast to the entire world that I gave you $10. And everybody's going to have to store that update in the ledger so that everybody knows that I gave you $10 and that nobody's ledger gets off kilter, right? And you can imagine that amount of energy and processing power that takes. Okay, everybody in the world needs to know that you and I just did an exchange. That's kind of crazy, right? Holochain says, yeah, it's totally crazy. And in fact, what you actually need to be doing is tracing the lineage of that $10 bill, so that what's really important is the DNA of the information that I'm carrying in my wallet and your DNA in your wallet, such that when I give you $10, you can verify that it's a real $10 and it came from someone else, and et cetera. And right now, what we do is we encrypt that into the dollar bill, the $10 bill, so that you can tell it came from the Federal Reserve. But I don't have to tell anybody else in the world that we just did an exchange. Now, if we're in a community and we're all exchanging currency and value, then yeah, we want to expose our shared ledger to everybody else. So we can say, okay, this person gave this many hours, and then now that person's taking those hours and giving this much back. And you can see that kind of dance in a community. But this is redefining the nature of the blockchain by saying, what if we did everything agent-centric? What if it's actually all about you as the person, as the user, and the chain of events that you experience? And that is very, very close. In fact, that is almost identical to the way the real world works. I don't have to tell everybody in the world that I trust you or don't, or that I trust some person in physics or not. I only need to know my own trust. And when I give my trust, I can tell that now that I've given this person trust, if they trust someone else, I can now follow that chain of trust and give them a little bit less trust based on the fact that I trust this person, right? So there's this individually oriented web of magic that comes out in this kind of system. And holochain is breaking major ground in that. So anybody interested in the future of blockchain and where we're really going, I'd say get involved with holochain and get some hot token from your Ethereum.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that tip. That's excellent.
No problem.
This is exciting stuff. I'm just getting on this train myself. So I'm definitely noob with all of the crypto stuff, but it's super cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I want to talk about your quantum geometry course.
Okay.
When I first heard that term, I was like, oh, this is so amazing. And as a little sidebar here, in general, you are just such a multi-talented person. Like, I think it needs to be said that on top of being like a physicist and on the leading edge of the intersection of like consciousness and spirituality and technology, you're also like a super badass bass DJ, and like you're just this like alchemist of sound as well, which is so cool. And I want to ask you, we'll go back to the course in a second, but I want to ask you about your experience of physics on all levels.
Okay.
And if that has influenced you as a musician because of how you understand, know, and see the geometry of sound.
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. My understanding in physics has affected every aspect of my life. I began to explore and study physics because I, as a teenager, discovered that I have a human energy field and that there's a vibratory field around my body that could be controlled and stimulated and extended using my conscious will. And I began to play with this when I was 15 years old, and it was pretty fun. It was kind of like finding the force.
How did you first to stumble upon this casually?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had this brother, Christopher Oriana, and Chilean man, a couple years older than me. I was 15, so I was like a freshman in high school. So he was a little older, had a car, much cooler, to hang out with. I was a dork for sure. And
no.
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. I was such a dork. And so uncomfortable in my body and so awkward and uncomfortable with my troubled past and having lost my stepmom in a car accident when I was 10 and moving across the country and my parents living in different places. I was very confused about who I was and struggled with knowing myself and being myself. And so a lot of my time as a freshman in high school, I was like heading home and holing up and basically learning hacking, basically like how to hack computers and how to use 2600 frequency to basically turn a phone line into a receptive state to be able to jump through 800 numbers and figuring out how to turn on and off cable lines on people's houses and pick locks. And I was learning all of these like ninja skills because like I just was, I felt very separate from the rest of the world and other people. and was trying to find some way to kind of have some strength in myself. And those kinds of skills became much more relevant later in my life and over the years following. When your teacher or somebody locks themselves in something or can't get open a door, and you're able to pull out like a paper clip and a little screwdriver and unlock it for them. It's a heroic moment for a teenager.
There's the cool factor coming back in.
Yeah, right. But that took years. It took
Right.
a couple years for me to get there. And so with Chris Ordiana, we used to ask all these questions. I'd go hang out with him after school, and some of those questions were like, how is it possible you could feel it when someone's looking at you from across the room? And why is it that you can think about someone and they call you on the phone? Those were the big ones. And there was a ton of others around martial arts skills and techniques. He and I were both kind of budding martial artists, and I'd had sort of innately studied martial arts since I was a child, although every time I tried to take classes, I always thought the teacher was doing it wrong. So I had a really hard time staying in any classes. But it led to this one day where we're in his downstairs basement, and we start playing with this idea of how is it that you could feel someone's eyes across the room, and is there experimentation? And Chris had a friend who suggested this one experiment, and so we tried it. I think his friend's name was Nathan, and I only met him once. But it was a little while later, and I realized that Nathan had already kind of figured out some of this stuff. But for me, in that moment, it was a total discovery process, because I literally put my fingertips together like this, and I slowly separated my fingertips and was looking at the space between them. And, if you do it real slow, you get this interesting sensation on your fingertips. And then I suddenly wiggled my fingers, and I could see these little streams between my fingertips. And I realized I could create this feeling of pressure between them. And suddenly it was whoa, what is that? What is that? That's not, nobody's told me about that before, right? That's missing in my textbooks. That's missing in science class. That's missing in anything, nowhere, right? And it just was the first of a cascade of downloads. It was as if I just picked the lock in an Akashic library that I'd stored away from myself. And the next thing I knew, I was practicing with him, locating an object around the room using tingles in my fingertips, and doing blindfolded martial arts. And I would go faster and faster and faster blindfolded to see how quickly we could intuit and feel where each other's hands were. And I realized that all of these special abilities in martial arts, all of these deep mysteries in the world, were connected to this underlying fundamental field. And I wanted to know so bad why the heck this wasn't in our science. How could this be missing from physics? How? It's so easy to have this experience. And there's so many stories from different cultures. And as I found, it's in the Wiccan stories and in the Druid stories, and prana for people from India, and then odic force and vital force. And I mean, it's all over the place. Magic, and yet science, nothing? Really? And so that started me on the path. Mm-hmm. And I realized very quickly as I dug into science that in fact the exact shape of the hole and the divide between special and general relativity, Einstein's work, and quantum mechanics with Heisenberg and Bohr and all of those guys, the exact gap that was missing to connect physics, to unify physics, in fact, where there's been this massive divide, the shape of that hole is described by the ether. It's described by the quantum field. And in fact, the name ether was used for hundreds of years in the early days of physics, all the way back into the days of philosophy, and had the lineage going all the way back into elementals and magic and history, all the way back to the earliest Greek, Roman studies and beyond and beyond and beyond, all the way back to Atlantis, right? So all of a sudden, somehow this one very, very essential underlying thing is just gone from physics.
Right.
And the reason it was removed was because two guys named Michelson and Morley took a tabletop and a laser array, and they couldn't detect the pressure of the movement of the Earth hurtling through space through the surrounding ether around the Earth. And they never thought to question, maybe we're not going to pick it up because maybe the whole field around the Earth is moving with the Earth.
Right.
They never thought to think that the surface of the Earth and the atmosphere and all of that could be made of ether.
Right.
And it could be moving with the Earth. So of course you're not going to detect the pressure of movement through outer space on that. And Einstein dismissed the ether because when he wrote Special Relativity, he proved the way that light works without needing this luminiferous fluid underlying, that light could be studied just for the way that light operates. And so everybody was like, oh, that's it. No more ether. We don't need it. It didn't take long, though. It took 10 years. And then Einstein's teacher, Lorentz, when Einstein wrote General Relativity describes space-time as this continuum of a fabric, and that when it curves or bends, light curves and bends with it. And his teacher, Lorentz, was like, wow, Einstein, you just proved the ether exists, right? And Einstein's like, oh, you're right, I did. And so Einstein wrote a paper describing how general relativity requires an ether to exist. You cannot have general relativity and you cannot have space-time without a fundamental mechanics, and therefore the ether must exist. He said this is Einstein's quote, but by this time he was a little older and nobody wanted to rebring back the ether. They all ignored it. And to this day, it's pretty difficult to find this paper. There's literally 1 to 2 universities that even keep a copy of it online for you to read. And it just was completely blocked out of science.
So why is this, and what are the implications of all this for like the average human being?
The implications are that we are immersed in a vibratory field of energy. This is not empty space. This is not empty space that little balls of molecules are bouncing around in, as we learn in science. This is, in fact, a high tensegrity, superfluid, vibratory lattice of light. And the light lattice itself is mostly in equilibrium. In other words, it's forming tetrahedral, triangular, equilateral, triangular-like structures. And so because of that, energy and information passes through it as if there's nothing there, right? It's like a clear piece of glass or crystal that light just travels right through. It doesn't get stuck in it because of that equilibrium. But all matter, every atom, every molecule, literally every proton, most importantly, every proton is literally an area of space-time that's curved itself into a sphere. And because of that curvature is literally what creates gravity, because Einstein defined space-time curvature creates gravity. So you have these little balls of the curvature of space-time, and if they were sitting still and it was just able to pull the surrounding fabric, you would have literally like massive amount of gravitation around every single proton, and everything would collapse in on itself. This is why everybody freaked out when Nassim Haramein was like, I think protons are black holes. Schwarzschild proton, like it makes sense. If it has that, level of mass energy and it's all combined in one little thing, then it should be a black hole. But everybody's like, that's impossible because then everything would collapse on itself. Except that all the protons are spinning. And they're spinning so fast that at the at the equator, along the horizon, they're spinning at the speed of light. And because they're spinning at the speed of light along their equator, they now are shearing space-time and they're creating their own standalone little field, almost like a little spaceship. They're like little spaceships, and all the mass energy they have, which would otherwise pull everything into them, is stabilized. And this is also why protons are the one particle that we know of that doesn't decay. Literally, we think a proton's lifetime, half-life, is like 4 times the lifetime of our entire universe. In other words, we've never seen a proton decay, ever.
Right.
Neutrons decay in split seconds. Electrons, well, electrons aren't really particles. Electrons are just the field that is moving around these spinning objects that are the fundamental units of mass. And these fundamental bits, when they plug together in different ways and they bond at the poles and in certain geometries, that creates the dynamics that give us all these molecules, that give us the perception of all of these things, differentiating the molecules of air from the molecules of a flower or a piece of metal or a piece of glass. And all of that comes down to this very, very simple fundamental geometry. And it's all just basic geometry. And that's the content of my course, Quantum Geometry, is I literally go down and I describe what's going on at these fundamental levels from this classical standpoint of space-time being this super fluid fabric, and from different ways that works in equilibrium and curves to make gravity and the geometries that give rise to that, you can get every force. You can get all kinds of matter. Everything arises from that. And so it therefore unifies physics completely.
I'm just going to let that land for a moment. This is powerful, powerful stuff.
Thank you.
I love this concept of like kind of going into the physics of consciousness or I want to say like the geometry of God, like all of these spaces and this nuance, because this whole conversation is actually helping me integrate a great deal of my plant medicine experiences, because I don't have that physics background, but I've seen things that I was like, what? And my experience of that fluid fabric and the particles and the collapsing and the turning inside out of things and expansion and contraction, you're giving it some name here in a way that's making a lot of sense to me. So I'm thinking, okay, cool, great. If I accept everything that you're saying here, what are the implications of this for me as a human being in the year 2021, going to embody these principles, maybe want to flirt with the fluidity of the fabric itself, and, again, creator consciousness in this vibratory field that we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, it's easier than you think. Because, so in my journey with this, there's a little bit of a backstory that I'll weave this together with. So I started studying loop quantum gravity and string theory and special and general relativity. And this was all when I was a teenager in high school. And I decided to do my senior project in high school based on these revelations that I was having and the connections that I was making, because I started to see that this field of energy and the way that it worked geometrically underlied the problems in all of these areas of physics. And so my senior project in high school was called The Unification of Science and Spirituality Through Unified Field Theoretics. And so I was trying to address that very question that you're asking, is how does this relate to our everyday life? How does this relate to consciousness? And in my journey, the key that unlocked the door was the chakras. Because I'd already begun to witness from the time that I was 15 and I explored energy, I started to realize that energy moves in patterns, right? So what are those fundamental patterns? And what are those fundamental geometries? And how does energy move? Well, it started with some energy is obvious. Some energy moves like a liquid, it's water. Some energy moves like fire. Some energy crystallizes and forms solid objects, earth. And some energy swirls and moves and is very light and shifts things in waves like air. Well, that's interesting because fire, air, earth, water, that just happens to be the 4 elements of all of these old earth religions and traditions.
Alchemy.
Alchemy. It's in the indigenous peoples, it's in the druids, it's in, all these people point to this thing, whether you're pointing to it from a 4-pointed medicine wheel or you're pointing with a 5-pointed star that includes spirit. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. And it's funny because in Hinduism, they talk about the root chakra, which is used to communicate with the physical world and be the mediator of our physical experience, as this 4-petal lotus. And so being a geometric geek, I was like, wow, okay, the 4 petals are really like the 4 directions. And you're the center point at the top. You're the spirit point in the 5-pointed star. Or it could be your head and your arms and your legs are the other 4 points. You're the top of the pyramid experiencing the pyramid. And so I began to realize that the energy of our root chakra is actually the geometry of the 4 to the 5. It's the grounding of us into the directional matrix of being on the surface of a planet, but it vibrates in this beautiful simplex form, which the 5-pointed star is able to both encompass the energies of each of the individualized sort of forces, which, by the way, we still use. We just call them thermodynamics, aerodynamics, geodynamics, and hydrodynamics, right? We don't use study of fire, we say thermodynamics. So they're still there in our science, but it embeds consciousness as part of it. And our bodies incorporate in that chakric field, in that chakric, I just say chakra because it's easier than the chakra, it incorporates in consciousness. And then you move up from there. And the sacral chakra, I started to realize that we have these kind of physiological elements, but then inside of those, there's a vibration. And the vibration is more subtle. It's transcendent to it. And the vibration says, okay, that's going to be green or that's pink. The vibration says, this is going to be hard and that's going to be hard, but this is going to range one way and that's going to range a different way. The vibration tells us all of this difference in the energy of objects and things, and is in fact a reflection of the subtle field. And the subtle field is the energy moving within the object, right? Because, fire may be fire, but how does fire breathe and move and exist? Well, it's because energy is moving through it, right? And so that vibrational study led me to realize, wow, that's really interesting, because when we look at vibrations themselves, we see a certain set of colors. And almost everybody on the planet can agree in the color wheel, which we teach in all art classes, which is red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. Everybody differentiates those colors very easily. You could say indigo and violet, but a lot of people would just be like, that's purple, right? Like, it comes down to these 6 basic colors. And yet every one of those also has a perfect mirror, a perfect opposite, red and green and blue and orange and yellow and purple. They have trinity dynamics, polarity dynamics, all of these things. And I realized, my God, what we're looking at literally is the emotional spectrum, the spectrum of energy moving.
Yes.
And all those colors come together and they make white light, right? But a spectrum splits them out. And so everything, in a sense, is like a crystal that is refracting or reflecting certain colors of the light. Everything is a prism, and everything is revealing certain vibrations. because of the way they absorb the other vibrations and express the ones that it reflects or refracts off. This is everything but pink. This is everything but green. We see green because it's what that object is giving back. It's what it's giving off and it's reflecting. And all of that happens in the same way that all of the, whether it's water or fire or earth or air, solids, liquids, gases, plasmas, etc., those are due to the proton dynamics, the mass inside of that. But how do you get color? That's the electron field. And so right from there, I had two of the most important keys to the universe, that matter and mass is connected to the five and our experience of the physical world, and that vibration and color and emotion is connected to the six. And what I wouldn't realize for years after that, but that I'd started to build in those days in high school, was that, in fact, if you take this equilibrium lattice that we're all in and you try to curve it, you have to take the six lattice, that is the hexagonal triangulated structure that also happens if you draw a bunch of circles and you make a flower of life. It's all perfect triangles, and you have to take one out. And as soon as you take one triangle out, the other five triangles fold together, and suddenly you're able to start making a curve. And so the five is literally critical to curvature. And this is how Buckminster Fuller designed domes. If you go in a dome, the only reason the dome curves is because of spots where there's these intersections of the five. And I came to realize in my, in these days, I was probably 18, 19 when I figured it out. I was like, my God, gravity, the curvature of space-time is generated by the five. So it's not just the elemental spectrum. It's not just the vibration of the root chakra. It's literally how mass is created in the universe. And our root chakra is built to plug into that, to understand the mass of the universe and how things exist. And then the equilibrium, which is the hexagonal lattice, is designed that way to allow energy to move through it. And so what do we do with our emotions? Our greatest practice is learning how to actually feel an emotion and allow it to move all the way through.
Yes.
And when we do that, we are matching the vibratory harmonics of the way space-time is built, which is to allow energy to flow. That's all we're doing. We're just learning how to let it flow. And then the third piece, and I'll leave it with this one because I don't want to do a full exposition on the unified harmonic matrix, but you can learn about this work in some of my other talks. The third piece that I realized is the seven. And remember early on I was talking about 117.65 as this vibration?
Yeah.
Well, 5, 6, 7, the 5 goes into the 6, well, the 4 literally goes into the 5, and the 3 goes into the 4, and the 2 goes into the 3. It's the ray of creation. But when the 5 becomes the 6, then the 6 goes to become the 7, something very distinctive and very different happens. 6, you can't have 6 equilateral triangles and add another equilateral triangle. It won't fit in the same plane. The only way for that energy to fit in is for it to express itself in motion into another plane. In other words, it has to leave the surface. It has to go into a spiral. It has to cause spin. And so the dynamic from the 6 as this equilibrium is that in order to compress and become 5 and create curvature, it has to spin in order to create curvature. It rotates into the 5. And at the same time, something's got to go somewhere. So as soon as you compress, you have to radiate. And that thing that goes somewhere, as it radiates, it's causing spin.
Yes.
And that spin is radiation. And so the actual witnessing of radiation moving through the field, how space-time changes, is due to the 7. And that's where we move to the solar plexus chakra. It's the power of the mind and the will to change things. The mind is literally this radiant sun, solar plexus, which is refracting off of and reflecting off of everything, the lunar field, all things being mirrors of the mind and the self, and is embedding itself as energy into the earth, the objects, the physicality of being, which is the root chakra. And so we witness the physical world change around us through the acts of will and mind, in which we are literally radiating out and reprogramming the matrix around us.
Yes.
Yes.
Like, fuck. You know, I was just sharing with your lovely partner before we hit record, Luna. I was telling her, she asked about the name of the show. And people who have listened to this show before have heard the story, but basically, in my layman's terms, that's why I chose the Thought Room as the name of this show, because it's the idea that we can manipulate our own experience of this life on every dimension through harnessing the very powerful tool of our thought in connection with becoming that witness, right? And when you were talking about the spiraling up, I was envisioning the Kundalini energy spiraling up the spine and, clearing out the pineal gland and the third eye and then shooting out the crown. And so I love this. And I want to get a little bit into the geometry and like the geometric blueprint is the term that's coming to mind of our emotions. And I use the word, I don't believe in good or bad emotions. And perhaps you are with me on that, but I like to use the word like dense. So sometimes I'm sitting in something and it feels emotionally dense, or uncomfortable. And I'm actually throwing it back to sound about cymatics. And so for anyone who doesn't know about cymatics, they can YouTube it and see all kinds of cool things about like frogs in water and them making noises in the little ripples, or sand or water put over a piece of plexiglass on a speaker, and how different tones and vibrations, and you can speak to this a lot more thoroughly than I can, but create these intricate or not so intricate geometric patterns based on their vibration. So
that's right.
The frequency, am I getting this right so far? The higher frequencies are creating more complex geometric shapes. And lower frequencies it's a little bit less organized or less intricate, would you say?
Less intricate. More simple. But that's also because it's simple. Scalar. In other words, the size of the wave changes.
Right.
So depending on the size of the medium you're looking at, a low wave is going to have less waveforms visible than a high frequency wave, which will have lots of waveforms visible because it's high frequency.
So how does this relate to when people say like, oh, low vibe or high vibe? Like, what's your take on, what does it mean? Because, I heard you being introduced by someone. I watched one of your talks and she said, the first time that I listened to Adam, my vibration just was raised. And you do that. But like, if somebody doesn't have a language for what that even means, or what are we talking about here? Can we entrain people to higher states of consciousness with the structure of our sound that's coming out of our mouths?
Definitely. However, I would like to officially provide a correction to this particular area of understanding.
Please.
Or perhaps suggest a correction. You don't have to believe it. I highly encourage you to question and explore for yourself. Let's look at the physics and the dynamics of energy and waveforms, because whether we're talking about sound or we're talking about light, whatever we're talking about, if we're talking about vibrational waves, there are certain properties and physics to those vibrational waves, right? So when you listen to music and you're hearing a song that's got a clear harmonic structure and you're listening to a harmony A harmony is when you have a wave and you have another wave that may be at higher frequency, but it's synced up so that the lower wave and the higher wave meet at the same place. And so all the waves are in intersection with each other. And they create these clean spaces because the waves merge and diverge. And even though one might go 5 times and the other goes once, they're meeting again. And so in the air, as the wave is traveling through, you have these micro pressure wave fields, and then you have these larger envelope wave fields, and those are meeting and in harmony and in connection. And so inside of our eardrum, there's a vibration, the drum is vibrating, and it's got a pulse to it and a sequence to it, and everything is lining up and it's fitting together, and it sounds amazing because it reminds us of coherence, frequency, vibration, order in space, right? When we hear disharmonics, and we can enjoy that too, like a nice heavy metal guitar and someone squealing, right? Disharmonics is when those wave fields don't match up. And when they don't match up, you've got a wave coming down and another one coming up, and it's colliding and it's not meeting and there's no space, and it's just that creates pressure. It's a force, right? And it's not as clean and clear of a pressure and force as sound that's in a harmonic field, and therefore can actually create the experience of density. In fact, in our ear, it does. It's literally, our eardrum doesn't have the ability to even do a bounce. It's literally being pounded to the point where it can't even find what it should be doing to vibrate with it.
Right. It's like a double dribble.
Double dribble. You got it. Yeah. It's like incoherence and it's like stumbling. And that is a perfect mirror for us to take across to the field of consciousness, because emotion and energy and vibration that's moving and flowing all around us, when we have a lot of different thoughts and they're all conflicting and we have different emotions that are conflicting, you can feel it when you're talking with someone and everything is clear and coherent and it's truthful and it's present and it's coming from their heart, however we want to describe that experience. It's just clean. And then sometimes you can feel something arise in someone and there's a density to the emotional field that arises with it. It suddenly is a little less clean. Not to say that clean and dirty are good and bad. It's just that it contains more content that's not harmonic. In other words, it hasn't figured out it's harmonic. But here's the real secret, Haley, is that no matter how disharmonic any energy field is, no matter how off all the waves are, each wave in itself has the capacity for clarity. It's just that they're all jumbled up and they're in the wrong timing and they're in the wrong relationship. If you can expand out each of those vibratory waves, so for example, in a really heavy emotion that someone's really getting crushed by, it's usually because they've got sadness in there, they've got grief, they've got happiness, they've got anger, they've got fear, they've got all these emotions and they're all mixed up together and the person has no freaking clue what they're really feeling. It's just pummeling them.
Yes.
But as they begin to feel out and release different parts of it, express the anger and just scream about it for a minute, feel into the sadness and the real grief, and then feel into how the grief over something is really praise for the thing that they've lost. It's love, right? Like suddenly each one of those emotional waves has space within the field of our consciousness. We're giving them time, meaning we're giving them space. And the more each wave has its own space-time, the more its vibrational frequency is clear. And so even a sound, which in one context, you play that right sharp note or that bait or that, that really rough flat note in a certain harmony, and it just hurts to hear it, right? It hurts. because it's mirroring our emotional hurt when there's something that spikes us, that gets us, that we weren't expecting, that like hurts inside of us.
Right.
And yet, if you separate out that sharp or that flat note, let's say it's F sharp, and you put it in a different context to where now the rest of the field is in harmony with that vibration, suddenly you've got the resonant frequency of the King's Chamber of Giza that's ready to awaken consciousness.
Right.
Everything we perceive as a shadow, everything we perceive as the darkness, the unintegrated, the painful, the low harmonic is really just frequency and experience and perception that's not yet put into a context in which we can see its beauty.
And that is how it works on the inner, and that is how it works in the outer. To loop it back to our conversation before, what we are labeling as these dense or unwanted or heavy or negative emotions are parts of ourselves that are wanting to come home. And that's the same with our connection to each other all over the globe.
Yeah.
And to Mother Earth. We just want to be unified.
Yeah. Yeah, my gosh, we do. And we are. And we're so connected. We're all so connected. And in times like this, when there's so much mental energy and projection, and a lot of that projection is from trauma and from fear, and it's people trying to maintain control. It's people reacting to and trying to block out that which you don't want to look at, not admitting the faults, not admitting the pain that we've created. Boy, that energy gets so messy. It gets so complicated. And then here we all are, receivers, picking up on that field, maybe even just absorbing it through the news and the way that the news is expressing to us, or different teachers. And my God, it is so much to deal with. And nobody is at fault for being confused and feeling lost in the time that we're in. I go through it all the time. I have evenings where I'm like, oh, it is intense out there right now. What's it triggering in me? What's the piece of the shadow that I still need to look at? Where can I still create space to embrace parts of myself that are here, that need to be acknowledged? And when we look at relationship, it's, this is another part of my journey in learning about all of this and exploring the direct impact to our daily lives. We meet people all the time who we don't understand the depth of the energetic resonance that we have with them.
Yep.
We can't explain it. We don't know how to define or describe all these waveforms. We've got attraction, we've got pain, we've got fear, we've got all the stuff that's mixed up when we meet certain people. And for me, I had to say, well, if the experience in space-time that I have perceived with this person does not allow me to see the origin of all of these feelings and experiences, sometimes you can. Sometimes it's like, oh yeah, that reminds me of that relationship I had and that was painful and this person's acting like that. It's reflecting back to me. I'm now able to kind of look at that and see that I still haven't resolved this in myself. Sometimes it's clear. Sometimes it's definitely not. And what I had to start doing is that from a study of my own psychology and the metaphysics of that, I had to say, well, what if there's a greater space-time in which that information or energy can be explained? And I was, kind of hard dropped into it by having super intensive past life memories with other people that I couldn't explain away, that my science mind had to face, especially when, you've got that third person who's drunk at a party and is crying and bawling and calling you by the name of one of your past lives that like you'd only remembered because you'd had a dream with another person and you both dreamed about that lifetime and remembered what you were naming each other in that life. And then here's this guy you hadn't ever talked to about this or met or knew anything about it, now drunk and calling you by that name, apologizing to you for the stuff that they did. And here I am, like physics mind trying to figure it out, going, oh, this can't be just explained away. Like I can't just drop this. I have to actually take account for the potential that I have more space-time experience with this person and with these people around me and with all of these relationships that I have than the ones that I've experienced wearing this meat suit.
Wow. I feel that. I feel that with you, my friend. I feel we've done this once or twice, or maybe many times. And
I knew it when the first time you reached out to me and I heard your voice. And that's why I was like, let's talk.
Here's the crazy part, or not so crazy part, is I started typing out this message to you. I had a message typed. And my inner voice stopped me dead in my tracks and was like, let him hear your voice. He will recognize it.
Thanks. I wish more people would do that. I'm really pretty bad at checking audio messages in general. But it does make a difference.
Yeah.
I can feel a lot more of someone through their voice. And I can get a lot from photos and things too. But
right.
Voice is extraordinarily powerful at revealing our soul essence.
I mean, I think that's so true for everyone listening. They can think of a time they've called someone that they loved.
Yeah.
It's like, how are you doing? And they're like, I'm fine, or everything's great. And you can hear in their voice more information than they're giving you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can tell.
Adam, this has been so incredible, so worth the wait to get with you in person. Again, it's so validating to me of why I do these in person, so we can create our own harmonics here in the coherence of syncing up our heart fields within this less than 6 feet distance and to create this magic together. I can't thank you enough for your lifetime of dedication to this work and the grounded way with which you bring some highly esoteric and complex spiritual topics here for the earth, for the people, and you present it like this beautiful, just like 5-star Michelin star dish, that you're feeding to us. It's so gorgeously presented. So thank you so much for that and for your presence and your time here today. I cherish you. I would like to ask you, as we come to a close, where can people find you online? Maybe give your website, your social media, and any of the domains for all of your amazing projects, because I know there's going to be so many people that want to align with you after this.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's truly a deep honor and pleasure to do this with you. And thank you for the space that you create and the insightful questions that you ask. And I've really enjoyed this trail and would be happy to do it again with you anytime.
Sweet.
Yeah. It's pretty easy to find me. You can Google Adam Apollo and find a bunch of stuff. AdamApollo.com is my official personal site. It's got tons of stuff and years of media and interviews and talks if people just want to go a little bit deeper into the journey of my work and the different areas that it encompasses. If you're really excited about the physics stuff, I highly recommend going to resonancescience.org, where I built the original version of the Resonance Academy. It's now evolved into new iterations and forms, but I wrote the Module 3 and most of Module 4 in the Unified Science course, which is the best introduction to unified science and unified physics, I think, out there. And my portion is the difficult and painful part of actually learning the history of physics and how we got here. But it's, I think, really valuable for people to understand how we get to the unified physics. And then did a lot of work to help translate Nassim Haramein's incredible work in this area. He's truly a master physicist, and that's his life path. That's his work. I touch a lot of different things, so I think of myself a little bit more like a philosopher who understands physics and helps to teach physics. But I did my best to help translate a lot of his work and help people understand it better and absorb it better. And then I have a quantum geometry course, which is my own course in that academy, which is really fun and interesting and goes really deep into that 5-6 dynamic and its relationship, and kind of reveals the underbelly of its connections to consciousness and history and things like that. And then my other school is called the Guardian Alliance. After I built the Resonance Academy, I built the Guardian Alliance, and I did that in order to create the space for a new kind of mystery school where different kinds of teachers and people could come together and share a lot of these deep wisdom pieces without being so strict to the frame of the tradition they come from, or having to follow the exact lineage process that's maybe been used for a long time and may feel obscure or difficult for people to get into, and instead reveal a lot of these explorations through the lens of young people that have gone through these journeys and rediscovered themselves through those journeys, and rediscovered their gifts and brought those gifts forward as masters of other times, to share their wisdom now, and to really lift up that group. And the Guardian Alliance is just about to have a new series of courses released.
Oh, great.
We have a gentleman named Adrian who's known widely as the Dance Jedi, who's going to teach elemental creation and movement through dance. And Alexandria Russell, who's created this alchemy course called Biochemia, which goes into the really deep, powerful, esoteric layers of alchemy and life applications of alchemy. So we have some exciting stuff coming in that department.
So cool. And I personally can speak to at least the iteration before of Guardian Alliance, because you gave me access to them. And I have to say, it was kind of like, how would I describe this? It's like Harry Potter meets Jedi training meets like video game, because it's like gamified and you get these badges and you can, you'd have to list them for me, Adam, but there's like the healer,
ambassador,
Star Walker.
That's a heart, healer, ambassador, throat, Star Walker, third eye, wizard, solar, weaver, sacral, and warrior, which is root chakra. So the archetypes each are empowerment processes and practices that actually enhance your ability to experience the universe through different layers of your being.
Casually.
Yeah.
It's so fun too. Like you finish one of the courses and you get like a little gem on your little avatar. And it's I love the interface. I love the experience of it. And I cannot recommend that enough to everyone listening who wants to just deepen their gnosis or reawaken their gnosis of these special realms and these powers that lie within us, dormant and waiting to come alive once again.
Yeah, and I honestly look at all those academies, even the Visionary Arts Academy, which we also have, as prototypes towards the system that I'm building now, Core Network. And you can learn more about that at core.network. But they are going to undergo a massive evolution as we bring it into this AR, VR, XR first kind of spatial, visual navigation experience.
Sweet.
So I'm very excited of where these academies are going to get to go in the future, to be able to more visually and interactively explore the physics, as well as the self-development studies in Guardian Alliance.
Like gamifying the expansion of consciousness on the VR virtual reality level.
Yeah.
It's very, very cool.
Yeah. Imagine you can get inside of the body of a master doing Tai Chi, and you can see where their body is. And as you align your body to the position of their body, suddenly you can hear it. You can feel it, like
the subtle energetic, like nuance of
harmonic of alignment as you get into the posture correctly.
That's so amazing. I was driving my partner's car on the way here, and every time that you like hit a rumble strip on the road, the actual seat has vibrating strips on. So like if you're like veering too far to the left side of the driver's seat will vibrate, and then vice versa. So I'm like, that would be so cool as a VR experience, is like discord or vibrational malalignment, and then like that like inner like ecstatic feeling of when you get the energy right.
Yeah, when you line up. Yeah, it should just feel like spacious harmony. And it's only when you're out of equilibrium that things start to get a little shaky.
Totally.
So you can find that still point.
I love it. Training ourselves to find the still point.
Yeah.
It's the future.
Yeah. It's going to be fun. And then we'll build starships next.
Perfect.
Yeah.
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 I feel like that's going to have to be the next podcast.
We should. I've left them hanging several times, I think, on that potential future. So.
Well, can you give us a little taste of what you were talking about before with the potential future of? Let's have it.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Well, once you understand that species have already figured out how to become stewards of their planets, the next question is, well, how do we interface with their society and culture? And that comes down to basically the dynamics of galactic civilization. How do planets interoperate and relate to each other on a galactic scale in a peaceful manner? How do they have equilibrium between cultures in such a way that they're not taking from each other and they're not in competition for resources or ideas or thoughts? And it really comes down to a few fundamental pieces. One is, and this will be a bonus round for the team here. The fundamental philosophy underlying that kind of culture is open source, which is why open source as a movement in technology has been so huge on this planet. We've seen massive innovation and development occur through people open sourcing knowledge and information, whether that's looking at WordPress as an open source system for building websites, and all of a sudden a third of the entire internet is, being built on WordPress. Roughly, it's not exactly that, but it's close. And then you have, basically other systems being open sourced, accelerating engineering and productions and things like that. When you deal with that at a nationwide level, imagine if every country in the world decided to join an open source union to choose to share all of their top innovations in technology openly with each other. How much less conflict do you think we would have if every country always had access to the most advanced thing? No, we're always in a power race right now over who's got the best tech and who's got the biggest rocket and, all that stuff. And so that's the foundation. And then when you have localized energy technology, what we often call 0-point energy technology, which is really just, one term for tapping into the vacuum energy, the fundamental vacuum fluctuations, the ether within the field. Now you've got enough energy to clean, desalinate water, produce food, run lighting. Like, you can do anything in any environment when you have that at very low cost. Nobody else needs to starve. We never run out of water. It's just easy, right? So that's a massive resource game change. And then the next resource game changer is replication. We already right now build gemstones one molecule at a time. We've already figured out how to do 3D printing and literally print food, in some cases, using certain materials and forming a structure. We're building buildings, with 3D printed concrete. The next step is learning how the Planck scale fabric of this underlying field works, so you can literally begin to print matter. You can print atomic structures and molecules from the base level. And when you're able to begin doing this and assembling and changing this structure of space-time itself, you literally, there's no more resource shortage ever. You can create as much gold as you want, or tungsten, or rare minerals, or rare materials, or whatever. And none of that is ever going to have a value again, because now you can create as much of it as you want. So what has value?
Right.
It's the art, it's the assemblage, it's the technology you create from it, it's the ideas of the people. And that becomes a new kind of economic layer that's actually about people exchanging their gifts with each other. And it's and suddenly also, as soon as everybody's able to have basic needs filled, and food and water and housing and whatever else and all of that, how do you deal with the hierarchy of power and flow? Well, it actually becomes much more valuable to look at trust as the mechanism for understanding leadership and hierarchy than it is to look at money. Because you could have a ton of money and not have any trust and be just destroying the world. You could have no money, but all the trust of all these people, and you can heal the world.
Right.
And that's real change in power. And then the final stage, of course, is gravity control. And that's understanding how the curvature of space-time works. And when you learn how to negate the curvature of space-time and create an isolation envelope, a vibrational metric field around an object that separates the internal space-time from the external space-time, now you're able to move without acceleration. In other words, without creating G-force, without warping space, and thus you're able to move faster than light.
Right.
And now you just need navigation systems to jump to other star systems, and suddenly there's no more population issue on planet Earth.
Right.
And so these are some of the key integration factors where we're right on the precipice of these technologies and this next level of human life and society. And as soon as we're cracking through each of these gates, suddenly now the doors will be open to us to become part of this galactic community. And so it's important that we develop some of the mental openness to each other as races, to our different vast languages and cultures, to practice the spiritual development required for us to then be open to the many diverse and incredible ways of being that different beings out there in the galaxy choose, and that they've been able to choose and continue to choose and live peaceful and blissful and happy existences. You know, we have to get over our own stuff.
We got a lot to learn.
Yes.
Us
Yes,
humans.
we do. Yes.
Yes. Powerful. Powerful. And thank you for your articulation of that.
You're welcome.
This is exciting stuff.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. I can't wait to go, cruise around on my starship.
Yeah, sweet.
Have a good old time.
Let's rent a starship for my next big birthday, and we'll just cruise around. Sounds great.
I'll call some of my homies up there and see what we can do.
You could pull some strings.
Yeah.
Do they have strings up there?
Not the same way that humans do. Not the kind of like manipulative strings that humans pull on each other all the time. That's for sure.
Right.
Yeah. But all of these things have perfect timing, and it's important for us to recognize and to look at, we are like adolescents in a field of a lot of adults, and we're still just figuring out, how to get the driver's license.
Yeah.
And we're a little off kilter, and we're a little rebellious, and we think we already know things. We're very hormonal. And so there's a little maturation process that we are going through. And I believe very strongly that we will make it through it, and we'll do it with the help of the wisdom and insights and downloads of these beautiful wisdom keepers that have already figured out that have already gone through that problem, those issues, and have learned those lessons. And they're going to give us space to figure it out ourselves.
Like good parents do, good adults do.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Adam, I adore you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me here in your home.
Oh, it's such a pleasure.
This has been a beautiful afternoon. I've enjoyed every moment.
Likewise, me too. Thank you.
Thanks.
Aloha.